Hi kiddos! Be sure to check out the Google Doc on today's lesson. We are doing an artist study on Marc Chagall, and if you read the questions first, you'll hear the answers while I'm reading you the story. Marc Chagall was born in the Russian city of Vitebsk in 1887. He used memories of his childhood and images from his dreams to come up with a magical, beautiful, and sometimes very mysterious kind of art. Marc Chagall and his family lived in the Jewish section of Vitebsk, which was more like a small village than a city. To Marc, Vitebsk seemed like a stage in a theater. He thought of the people there as actors, acting out a mysterious, wonderful play. People who lived in Vitebsk were very poor and had hard lives. The happiest times were during celebrations, like weddings and religious holidays. In many of Marc's paintings, people who are happy are shown floating in the air, free from their problems. Just like in this painting called The Walk by Marc Chagall. Marc often painted animals doing things that people do. This seemed normal to Marc because he grew up listening to lots of Russian folk stories and fairy tales in which animals were human-like. Marc Chagall had 7 sisters and 1 brother. His father was a fish seller and his mother owned a small grocery store. There were always lots of fun aunts and uncles around. One of Marc's favorites was his Uncle Noosh. Uncle Noosh played the violin. Marc said that when Uncle Noosh danced around the room playing, Marc became so happy that his head would gently float off his body and follow his uncle around. Marc Chagall was a great dreamer. Marc always loved animals. He enjoyed talking to the goats, chickens, and friendly cows that roamed around his village. Marc talked to the stars in the sky, too. He thought of them as his friends. Marc noticed that the stars always waited for him wherever he went. He said he sometimes apologized for keeping them waiting for such a long time up there in the sky. Marc Chagall never saw painting or drawing until he was 13 years old. Art and artists weren't a part of most of people's lives in his small village. One day in school, Marc saw a boy copy a picture out of a book. Marc couldn't believe his eyes. He didn't know a person could do such a thing. Right away, Marc tried copying pictures himself. He loved drawing, and put his artwork up all over the house. It was during this time that Marc Chagall decided that he would be an artist. At first, his parents thought that was a crazy idea. They hardly knew what an artist was, but Marc was so excited that he finally convinced his mother to let him take art lessons. Marc found an art school in the busier part of Vitebsk. And here is a self-portrait that he painted of himself. Marc learned to draw mostly by copying plaster statues. In 1907, when he was 20 years old, Marc went to St. Petersburg, the capital city of Russia. There he was able to study with better teachers and see the work of well-known Russian artists. He began to paint his first mysterious works from his memory. While in St. Petersburg, Marc also learned about Paris, France. Paris was a city where many of the world's best artists went to study. Marc Chagall decided to move to Paris in 1911. He loved the people, beautiful buildings, and restaurants he found. The most important thing Marc found in Paris, though, was the light. Everything seemed to glitter and sparkle with light in Paris. Marc understood how French artists like Claude Monet and Henri Matisse were able to fill their paintings with light and color. Soon Marc Chagall was starting to add color to his paintings. He found it gave them more life, and they seemed to glow from the inside. When Marc Chagall was starting out in Paris, he and his artist friends were very poor. Because they couldn't afford canvases, they sometimes had to paint on tablecloths, bed sheets, or even the back of their pajamas. In his painting, The Violinist, you can even see the pattern of the tablecloth Marc used. And here is his painting, The Pianist, or The Violinist, and you can see this pattern in several different places on the painting, and that's the pattern of the tablecloth. Fiddlers were very important to Marc Chagall. They reminded him of his Uncle Noosh and happy chimes from his childhood, although Marc thought of fiddlers as mystical leaders in Russian villages. Marc was painting some of his most exciting works now. Sometimes he was influenced by other artists, such as Pablo Picasso's Cubist paintings. Marc kept his work original, though, by sticking with his idea of using dreams and memories from the past. And here are more examples of these Pablo Picasso Cubist-inspired paintings. This may have been Marc Chagall's most important decision as an artist, to continue being inspired by his dreams. After spending 4 years in Paris, Marc decided to go home for a short visit. Just after he arrived in White Bisque, World War I began, and right after that, the Russian Revolution. Marc wasn't allowed to leave Russia during this time, and his short visit lasted 7 years. These were important years for Marc Chagall, though. Marc learned what Russian revolutionary artists were doing. He made paintings for the new Russian government and headed up an art program, organizing museums and putting on art shows. Marc also painted a huge mural for the Jewish theater in the city of Moscow. So here is a few of his paintings that he painted during the time of the Russian Revolution. In 1922, Marc Chagall was finally able to leave Russia. He moved back to Paris with... Oops, I skipped a page. Maybe the most important thing to happen to Marc Chagall during his long stay in Russia was falling in love and marrying his sweetheart, Bella Rosenfeld. Marc and Bella were crazy about each other. And here's one of his paintings. Even during years of war, Marc had some of his happiest times. He showed his joy of life and love for Bella in many of his paintings. In 1922, Marc Chagall was finally able to leave Russia. He moved back to Paris with Bella and their daughter, Ida. Marc became busier than ever, painting, illustrating books, and exhibiting his work. He and his family lived in France until World War II began. Things weren't safe for them now. Adolf Hitler, the German dictator who started the war, was planning to take over France. Hitler didn't like modern art or artists at all. He made sure their works were taken out of the museums, and he sometimes even had paintings destroyed. But worse than that, Adolf Hitler hated anyone of the Jewish faith. Luckily, Marc Chagall was invited to stay in the United States at that time. The Chagalls left France right away. In America, Marc's paintings changed. His work started to show how upset he was about the war. Just before World War II ended, a terrible thing happened. Bella became ill and died. This was the worst time of Marc Chagall's life. He didn't paint for months. When he finally began painting again, he used powerful, mysterious colors and images to show his sadness. And we can see that in these two paintings, his color scheme is much different, and so are the way that the figures are depicted. But they're still floating figures and animals. As time went on, Marc Chagall got back to using happier colors and images in many of his paintings. He began creating prints, stage designs, and ceramics too. And here we can see he's back to some of his more brighter color palettes and paintings that are full of light. Marc Chagall also made wonderful stained glass windows. His swirling colors lit from behind by sunlight are amazing to see. They seem to fill the area with color and make you feel like you're part of his magical world. So this blue image is a picture of a stained glass window. Marc Chagall lived to be 97 years old. He had an amazing imagination, mixing scenes from his dreams with those of the real world. Throughout Marc Chagall's life, his art showed the images he remembered from the time he was a small boy. So here's our last image from this book. And now I'd like you to go back to your Google document on Marc Chagall and answer the questions and follow the prompts. I hope you're washing your hands. Bye.